Hey guys, today I want to try something a little more lighthearted. I know recently there have been one too many videos of me being overly critical towards League of Legends, so today's video we're gonna do something else. Those of you who have been here since maybe like April may remember I was thinking about ranking every champion in League based on their design, and I got a ton of people requesting that because they were curious as to what my thoughts were if I were to make a tier list of all 150 something champions in the game. Problem is, that would take an extremely long time and would be difficult for me to execute on a regular video. Instead, we're going to be starting with something less intensive by going through every mythic item in League of Legends. I'm going to be designating them based on my perceptions of their design, application, and overall stat efficiency. Not necessarily whether the item is overpowered or underwhelming, more along the lines of if I think they're a good addition to the game by improving the gameplay quality of the champions in a meaningful but also fair way. Though I will still be gauging how good the item is in theory. Right now we have 23 mythics, so I'm gonna do my best to go through all of them in one video. Probably a good idea to start from the bottom, then work my way up. So for D tier, there's only one item I'd put down here, Duskblade of Drakthar. I've never really found this item to be all that interesting when it was first introduced at the start of Season 6, and even less so after it got reworked in Season 11. It was a very standard lethality item, gave attack damage, ability haste, and armor penetration, pretty standard stuff. In terms of its properties, all it does is cause your next basic attack to do more damage to a target, briefly slow them, and takedowns make you invisible for a second and change. The reason it's in D tier is because it's, in my opinion, the worst assassin mythic because most assassins have stealth anyway, and that tiny bit of extra damage isn't really all that helpful for any of them. In fact, you tend to see this item more on champions that shouldn't really be building it, such as Varus, Sivir, and Master Yi. The former two pick this item just for the stats, while the latter abuses the stealth to wait for Q to come off cooldown so you have zero chance of hitting him. I understand this was meant to help out assassins who specialized in one-shotting one target, then needing a way to get out like Rengar, but in comparison to the other assassin items, Duskblade is pretty redundant, to the point where very few assassins actually build it. Moving on to C tier though, starting with Eclipse, another assassin item. During preseason, this was one of the best in the game, lots of healing, good damage, and a really strong passive that made you do a lot of damage, gave you a big shield and a burst of movement speed. It was good all around. After the nerfs, it's still okay, but the reason I put it in C tier is because it feels like a mythic that people go to when everything else doesn't work on them. Jace and Pantheon are the only two that come to mind who normally build this item, but that's due to every other option not working with their kit. Both have good trade combos which would warrant Eclipse, but it doesn't enhance their gameplay all that much as opposed to just dealing more damage with their usual stuff. Prowlers and Duskblade obviously don't work on them, nor do the Bruiser items. Trinity Force is up next. You guys may have noticed that pretty much no one builds this item anymore, whereas back in the day it was super good on a lot of champions. Actually, the only reason they built Triforce was because every Bruiser item was just really terrible for first buy. Before, it provided you with a wide array of offensive stats, along with the really hard-hitting Spellblade proc. It would be good for bolt trades and all-ins. Now, Triforce no longer gives mana or passive movement speed, instead giving you an increase of your base damage with every hit. Thing is, to keep this going, you have to be fighting for a very long time, and obviously that doesn't happen much anymore since the current meta favors burst or trades. Basically, Triforce is a bland item overshadowed by other more useful ones because they provide more than just stats. Imperial Mandate. Oh, how much anguish you caused us when you first came out. At the moment, I don't see a single support building this item, not even the mage or carry supports like Zyra or Vel'Koz. This item has the exact same problem as Duskblade. All it does is make you deal more damage when you and your teammates hit the same target together. But if your goal was to deal more damage, why not just build a defensive item? Now, when this first came out, it did way more damage by itself, which is why Maokai's support was the most broken thing in existence, but in its current form, it's too reliant on the ally proc, and the only supports that want to build this item would be better off taking other damage ones, like Leandres. Ludens Tempest and Night Harvester are the last two on this list. I'm putting them together because they're pretty much the exact same item, it's just that one is for people who need mana, the other is for people who don't. Both are pretty well-fielded items. You see a good number of AP champions who run this as their core. Essentially what they do is every few seconds your next ability does more damage and give movement speed. Of course, Ludens has a splash effect like it did before. Not bad by any means, but it's the same thing as Eclipse where all it really is a stat stick, which isn't the most clever or creative design. I acknowledge the need to have them, but they're pretty boring items otherwise and don't exactly change up the champion's gameplay or make it better in any way. Having covered the C tier, you've probably noticed a common trait. The only purpose they serve is to give champions a slight boost to what they've already been doing. No additional or extraneous properties, etc. I don't consider them to be badly designed items, they're just not all that interesting. So let's continue with the B tier, starting with Kraken Slayer. Kraken Slayer is meant to be the standard mythic choice for marksman. Gives you attack damage, attack speed, and causes every third attack to deal a burst of true damage. Nothing unusual here. You might be wondering why I put this in B tier when it seems like it should belong in C tier as more damage. But Kraken Slayer solved one of the most frustrating problems that plagued AD carry mains ever since the dawn of time: early tank busting. Back then, you would only be able to purchase Last Whisper as your third item at the earliest, and even when Infinity Edge was temporarily reworked to do true damage instead of bonus crit damage, you still needed 2 other crit items to get it to work. Tanks would literally steamroll AD carries in the mid game because they took 0 damage from them. But with Kraken Slayer, you now have a fighting chance against Malphite, Scion, Rammus, etc. Now AD carries can actually do stuff in the mid game instead of getting one-shotted by tanks. Gale Force is also in B tier. This one might be surprising for some people since you would think giving a slow, immobile marksman a dash is a wonderful privilege. It is, except 9 times out of 10, a small dash doesn't really save you from a Hecarim, Akali, and such. You're better off picking Kraken Slayer or Immortal Shieldbow to give you more combat power in hopes that you can fight your way out of it. That's why even on no-dash ADCs like Jinx, Twitch, and Aphelios, you don't really see them picking up Gale Force because they would rather just have the extra machine gunning or survivability. However, it's still a much more engaging item than any of the C tier ones. Leandres Anguish. Between Ludens and Leandres, I find this one to be better in practicality. While they both have the same basic principle of inflicting more damage on top of their abilities, Leandres offers mages, especially poke champions, a very effective way to play the neutral game. Before, Leandres Torment, the old one, didn't give any mana, so you usually wouldn't see your poke damage come to full fruition until your second or third item. Now, it provides you with every stat you need to make your damage hurt a lot, and since there's Demonic Embrace, the 2 items work beautifully together. That being said, it's still just, more damage, although it helps with shredding tanks and champs with a lot of sustain. Sunfire E just comes next. This was the standard item to build on tanks to give them a good mix of armor and health, along with a passive that allowed them to inflict more damage so they wouldn't fall off like a lead balloon in the mid to late game. It still does the same thing now, except the stats are spread across both armor and magic resist. Fortunately, Aegis is a lot better. Now it applies a wave of fire with every attack, making tanks like Shen and Zac a lot more scary to deal with on account of the scrappy fighting style. Respectable item with a clear goal, and the tenacity and slow resist mythic is quite nice as well. Moving on, we have Stridebreaker. I would have put this item in S tier before they changed it. Despite this item turning bruisers like Set, Darius, and Garen into the most terrifying freaks of nature, it was a very good item for giving slow and immobile brutes a bit more stick potential, although I would say a lot more stick potential, little too much stick potential. I think the main problem with the item was that it was both a dash and a long-lasting slow, which all but nullified fighters' susceptibility to being kited. I personally would rather they have kept the dash instead of the slow, but that's mostly me. Now it's in a relatively fair spot, it still has enough range to slow a lot of champions, and it gives a good combination of stats to be an efficient first purchase. Just went down a few pegs since the loss of the dash. Down the list is Moonstone Renewer. I find this item to be an interesting case of giving champions a little bit of what they're missing. It's in the B tier because it's a great mythic for enchanters that use a lot of heals and shields. I know Chiralius' battle song is all the rage right now, but being able to boost your heal and shield power by 35% with a single item is quite significant. Also, the fact that it provides a token heal to allies just by interacting with champions means even those who don't have heals in their kit can use Moonstone for that sustainability. I just don't think it's worth putting any higher than that though. Locket of the Iron Solari is sort of the same way. One thing tank supports lack is ally utility, and being able to provide a big shield to protect your team can come in handy in more ways than one. Also, the passive aura granting bonus stat resist, while small, can help in a pinch, especially for squishy champions like your ADC. It's the go-to item for champions like Leona, Thresh, and Blitzcrank who pack plenty of lockdown in their kit and just need something to guard their allies from counterattack. Very reasonable purchase. Lastly, in the B tier we have Prowlers Claw. Even though assassins and divers are already known for their stellar combat mobility, Prowlers is an effective way for those champions to fully optimize their combos. Two good examples would be Pyke and Rek'Sai. Both of their main lockdown tools require them to be standing right next to or under their opponent, and while they both have dashes to do so, sometimes they need just a little bit more distance to finish the job. The main issue with this item is that while it's certainly a lot more practical than Duskblade, oftentimes it's a little too situational. Unlike Gale Force and Rocket Belt, which are free targeted dashes, this one can only dash towards champions, and physical damage champions who need to get close to their opponent likely already can or benefit only from the active, not the passive stats. So that's the B tier, mythic items that improve the quality of champions gameplay mostly by ironing out a few janks that are in their kit. Aside from that, they're average in design and usage. The A tier will have mythics much the same way but taken a step further. So let's start with Immortal Shieldbow. In a similar fashion to Kraken Slayer, marksmen now have a fighting chance against mages and slayers, the two classes best in the mid game. While they do lose out on a lot of combat stats, they make up for it by being able to survive moderate amounts of burst damage. As you know, the longer you stay alive, the more damage you can do. It wasn't easy for AD carries to build early defensive items because they desperately needed attack damage, attack speed, and crit chance. So having an early survivability mythic that still provides the necessary stats is arguably the best quality of life buff for the bot lane. They needed this item like 5 years ago. Speaking of survivability, Goredrinker. It's another case of an item that provides a satisfying survivability boost for a lot of champions. Juggernauts and divers are pretty good at what they do, which is run right into the middle of the enemy team and throw as many hands as possible before they eventually go down. But one department many of them faced a bit of trouble in was survivability, particularly for divers. Even though Lee Sin, Renekton, Olaf, etc. had good explosive engage, they would often die immediately after because they would get focused down really quickly. Naturally, Goredrinker allowed you to survive a lot of heavy fire. Another added benefit is that it gives a much needed boost to wave clear for those who don't get much use out of Ravenous or Titanic Hydra. It's an item bruisers desperately needed. To go even further on the whole group of champions that desperately need an item finally get one, Riffmaker. AP bruisers have always been in a really terrible spot due to the obvious lack of ability power items that catered towards their subgroup. Granted, that group is very small, but it's still a number of champions. This item doesn't have any magical property and is mostly just more damage, which you would think puts it squarely in C tier or at most B. I put Riffmaker in A because, like Immortal Shieldbow and Goredrinker, it finally presented a good first purchase for AP champions that do not want to build mana items like Ludens Echo or Archangel Staff. While it's not the best solution, I think they could have been a bit more creative, it's certainly a major improvement for those types of champions. Divine Sunderer comes next. Right now, everyone's complaining it's overpowered, and admittedly it is, but here's why I put it in A tier. The problem with Spellblade prior to Season 11 was that the only AD option was Trinity Force, but the stats making up Triforce were only suited towards very select champions, as not everyone needs attack speed, mana, or even the movement speed. Champions like Vi, Camille, and Alawi specialize in hitting you really hard every now and then, while relying on their bruiser items to keep them alive. They don't really work all that well with Triforce, it's just that that was the only option. Divine Sunderer synergizes very well with champions that have empowered auto attacks, but a more trade-oriented style than an all-in. Basically, same reasoning as Goredrinker and Riffmaker, a group of champions that had no satisfying first item purchase and they finally got one. Chiralius Battlesong is in the A tier on account of it finally getting the whole Sivir ultimate thing to work. For those of you who don't know, Talisman of Ascension was the original item that gave everyone a wide move speed buff, but it was horrible in stats. Then it became Chiralius Reverie, which was this awkward mixture of health, HP, and mana regeneration. It was just a really weird item that had a good active effect but crummy base stats. Then it got transformed into a mythic. Battlesong's active effect is the same, but the passive part is what makes it so good. Using any supportive ability on an allied champion gives you both a quick boost of movement speed, which can really enhance champions like Karma or Lulu who already have movement speed boosts in their kit, and in a pinch they can empower their entire team. Moonstone Renewer provides restorative augmentation, which is nice but not always needed, but Chiralius gives a mobility augmentation which can be a huge tactical advantage for your team. Finally, we move on to the S tier. By process of elimination, you know which ones I'll put up here, so I'll cut right to the chase. Hextech Rocket Belt. Out of the 3 dash mythics still in the game, this is by far the best one. Like I said, Stridebreaker would be up here too before they remove the dash. There are so many AP champions whose gameplay completely transforms once they purchase this item. Burst and Battle Mages have notoriously poor mobility. Most of the time, they can't get into a very ideal spot to exert their pressure because they're slow and have no dashes. Rocket Belt fixes this issue by giving them a brief dash plus a boost of movement speed so they can get in just a bit closer. It's one of the most commonly purchased mythics in the game for good reason. Despite being a super tiny dash, the combination of stats and the champions that build it make it one of the best designed mythics in the game. It has a very valuable active, but not one that breaks the game the way Stridebreaker did at full power. Frostfire Gauntlet comes next. You might be surprised to see this in S tier, but hear me out. Just like Rocket Belt, Frostfire drastically changes how you can play that champion and how opponents have to play against it. Tahm Kench, Urgot, and Cho'Gath all have abilities that are very important to hit, but they're very slow and easy to kite. Just by adding a slowing effect to your attacks, you basically have a very easy way to stick to people and all but guarantee a fighting advantage. Why this is different from Stridebreaker despite having similar effects is because Frostfire's effect is persistent versus Stridebreaker's active effect with a relatively long cooldown. It also has one of the best mythic passive bonuses in the game, 100 bonus health per item, so you can get 4 to 500 at full build. That to me is far better than 25 more ability haste or 60 more ability power. Champions who scale well with bonus health can get so much value out of this item along with the passive. Turbo Chem Tank shares that same property. It did get nerfed a lot thanks to the Hecarim and Udyr fiasco, but at one point in time, legit everyone was building it. Rammus, Udyr, Hecarim, Volibear, and Nunu. Honestly, any tank or champion who needed a fast way in would take this item. Chem Tank was better than Righteous Glory due to the more practical stats it gave. Righteous Glory was okay, but not really the best item since it offered no immediate combat advantage which tanks need for their first item. They would usually buy Sunfire, Thornmail, or Iceborne Gauntlet since all of those inflicted damage. Chem Tank still has a Sunfire passive effect while giving all the right stats a tank would want on top of the active effect. So it took Righteous Glory's very useful speed up and combined it with really good stats, making tanks a major threat since it turned all of them into Rammus for 4 seconds. And last but not least, Everfrost, the only item in the game to give hard crowd control. I mean, what more could you ask for? Pick any champion that needs you to stay perfectly still. Twisted Fate, Silas, Ahri, Ryze. Any mage that doesn't really have a problem with mobility but has issue with lockdown or the need to land skill shots takes this item and uses it very well. A 1.5 second root on a very low cooldown. This by far is the most game-changing mythic in the game, with Protobelt coming second. Okay, so I'm sure I've pissed off a lot of people if any of you even made it this far. What do you think about this type of video, by the way? Did you enjoy it, or did you think it wasn't all that interesting? I'm planning on ranking every keystone rune next, so it would be awesome if you can give me some feedback on this episode before I start the next one. If you enjoyed though, a rating would be much appreciated. Consider subbing for more content like this. Don't forget to follow me on my socials and join my Discord server. Finally, if you haven't yet, check out my previous discussion videos after this one. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.